My name is Elias Blackthorn, and if you're listening to this, it's because there's still time to choose between staying or running. The Old West has seen plenty of dust, blood and bones strewn across the ground. But there was one night, one single night, that made even the bravest men tremble like abandoned children. The night the moon didn't shine silver over Red Hollow, but red as if the entire sky had bled. I remember the still wind. Nothing moved. Not even the horses' hooves beat against the ground. The silence was so thick it felt like the world was holding its breath. That day, the town was no longer just wood and dust. Red Hollow had become an altered, forgotten place, ready to receive something that came from far beyond life. The moon rose in the sky with a sickly glow. It wasn't just red, it was like an open eye, watching every dark corner, every shadow leaning against the crumbling saloons. The elderly murmured ancient prayers. Mothers hid their children under their beds, and even the drunks at the bar threw away their bottles, swearing the alcohol was playing tricks on them. But I knew it wasn't the whiskey. No, it was the fear of ancient stories. That night carried something real, something that breathed among the living, and I, cursed by the star in my chest, knew I couldn't turn away. Because when the moon bleeds, the shadows wake. And that night I heard footsteps that belonged to no man. And if you want to understand what walked among us that night, what the red moon brought back from the dust and earth, you will have to stay until the end of this story. The footsteps I heard that night echoed not only in my ears, but also in the hearts of the residents of Red Hollow. Fear was already embedded in the woodwork of the houses, in the women's eyes, and even in the men's calloused hands. The red moon seemed to pull at the darkest thoughts of every soul. The streets were deserted, but behind every closed door, a candle flickered, fighting the darkness. I heard prayers in hushed voices, forgotten psalms, and even indigenous chants that some old men repeated as if holding an amulet against death. Each house seemed like a makeshift fortress, but deep down, everyone knew that locking doors was no use against what was walking that night. That's when I met Mrs. Meredith, the oldest woman in town. Her hair was as white as the bones the desert devours, and her small, tired eyes reflected more than fear, they reflected certainty. She approached me with a broken rosary in her hands and whispered, "When the moon turns red, the dead walk again, Sheriff. It's not a legend, it's a warning." I tried to hide my disbelief, but the weight of those words sank into me like lead. Meredith was not a woman of delusions. Her entire life had been marked by loss, husband, children, grandchildren, taken by the desert, by violence, or by fever. If anyone understood the signs of death, it was she, but warnings spread like wildfire. Some men began nailing boards to the windows. Others dug trenches, as if expecting an outlaw attack. But there were no visible enemies, only the crimson sky, the pulsing moons, and the heavy breathing of the desert. It was in this atmosphere that the first news reached me. They said The cemetery, high up on the hill, was not silent. The dogs had stopped barking, and for many, this was a sign that they were no longer alone there. And so it was that, between prayers and whispers, I realized that the night was just beginning, and that my duty would take me straight to the heart of Red Hollow Cemetery, guided by prayers and the heavy silence that fell over Red Hollow. I made my way to the cemetery. The hill was shrouded in a low, dense mist, as if the earth itself had decided to hide what moved beneath it. No dog barked to alert me. No cricket chirped. Only the crunch of my boots on the gravel broke the emptiness. When I reached the iron gate, I realized it was ajar. The wind, which had previously died down, blew only there, making the gate slam slowly, creaking as if complaining of being awakened. The red moon illuminated each tombstone with a sickly glow, as if celestial blood dripped over the cold stone. Then I heard it, a muffled sound, coming from underground. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't wind. It was like nails scraping wood, like bones banging against the coffin. The ground before me began to shift. The earth heaved in small thuds, like suffocated breaths trying to escape the darkness. My heart raced, but my hands remained firm on the butt of my revolver. I knew there was no point in shooting at shadows, but my sheriff's instincts told me something was looming there, and it wasn't a man. One of the oldest tombs, marked only by a crooked cross, opened with a sharp crack. The rotting wood of the coffin shattered, scattering fragments into the air. From there, a figure slowly began to rise. It had no recognizable face, only a mixture of bones, dust, and the dried remains of leather that had once been skinned. The smell of damp earth and corpses filled my lungs. And then, in the absolute silence, I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, dragging, clay like sodden boots walking through mud. I whipped around, ready to fire, but there was nothing. Only the moon bleeding over me, illuminating a desert that seemed to have ceased to exist. That night, I realized Red Hollow was no longer alone. The town had new inhabitants, and none of them belonged to the world of the living. I descended the hill with the feeling that every shadow was watching me. The weight of the red moon seemed to crush my shoulders, as if the sky itself wanted to bury me alongside the rising dead. As I crossed the streets of Red Hollow again, I realized the town no longer breathed as it once did. Something had changed. The horses tied to the stables were restless, neighing and banging against the wooden doors, as if trying to escape an unseen presence. I saw one of them foaming at the mouth, its eyes wide, reflecting the same crimson glow. Bars the moon. The lanterns hanging on the balconies began to go out, one by one, with no wind to justify them, only dry crackles and dying flames, plunging the street into darkness. The few that remained lit cast twisted shadows, stretching and moving as if they had a life of their own. It was then that I heard a shrill scream coming from inside one of the houses. I ran there and found a distraught mother. Her daughter had disappeared. The window was open, and on the wall outside were marks, small, dirt-stained child's hands. The trail led away from the city, toward the desert illuminated by the reflection of the red moon. As I tried to calm the woman, I realized it wasn't just the missing child. Other doors opened, and other residents complained of strange things. Locked doors being forced from the inside, voices whispering in the dark, and even reflections of dead people appearing in cracked mirrors. It was at that moment that I understood. The cemetery hadn't been left behind. It had come down with me. The streets were empty, but I felt eyes on me around every corner. The silence was so heavy that every breath felt like a scream. And it was within this suffocating weight that the missing child's tracks led me to the entrance of the old abandoned mine. That place had a cursed reputation even before the moon bled. Decades ago, men dug too deep in search of silver, and it's said they found something that shouldn't be awakened. Few came out alive, and those who did never spoke lucidly again. Since then, the mine has remained closed, like a tomb swallowing secrets. But that night, the woodwork ceiling, the entrance was broken, as if invisible hands had ripped it open from the inside. The girl's trail led that way, and my duty, or perhaps my curse, compelled me to enter. The air inside was heavy, thick as smoke, but without fire. Red moonlight seeped through the cracks, dyeing the damp stone with a sickly glow. I moved forward, my hand firmly on my holster, each step echoing like a muffled gunshot. And then I saw them, shadows moving between the mine walls, cast by no flames. At first, I thought it was a mental illusion, but the whispers convinced me. Otherwise, hoarse, drawn-out voices, pronouncing my name like an accusation. Elias, Elias Blackthorn, murderer, cursed. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and then I recognized the figures. It was them, the men I had put down years ago. Outlaws, murderers, thieves, men who deserved their fate. But now they stood there, staring at me with empty eyes, as if death hadn't been enough. Their mouths moved, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was like iron scraping against iron, like bones breaking without flesh to cushion them. One of them stepped forward, and I could see the rope still branded around his neck, the first man I'd hanged in Red Hollow. His body was a mixture of dried flesh and dust, but his presence was real, solid, enough to make the ground tremble beneath my feet. I raised my revolver, but hesitated. How do you kill something that's already dead again? Still, I fired. The sound of the shot reverberated through the mine, but there was no blood. Just a momentary flash that illuminated dozens of faces around me, all looking at me, all expecting something from me. There I realized the cruel truth. They weren't just ghosts of men. They were pieces of the curse I carried, and they were there, not to be confronted, but to remind me that I would never escape what I had done. I understood that shooting wasn't enough, nor praying. To save the city, I would have to face my own sin. I raised my gun, but the duel wasn't one of bullets, it was one of courage. The spectre advanced, and for an instant I saw my own face reflected in it, as if the curse were blood coursing through my veins. I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed like thunder, and the red moon trembled in the sky, bleeding even more blood onto the earth. The spirit fell silent and simply vanished. It just smiled, as if it knew my struggle was far from over. Outside, the sky began to lighten. The moon, tired of bleeding, returned to its pale hue, as if nothing had happened. The town breathed again, but I knew the truth. Red Hollow would never be the same. The villagers believed it was all over, but I, Elias Blackthorn, bore the mark of that night. For no matter how much the moon hides its blush, the voices of the dead still walk beside me, and every time the full moon rises in the sky, even though it's clear and silvery, I hear footsteps coming from the cemetery. Footsteps that belong to no one in this world. Not every moon shines. Some only reveal what should never emerge from the darkness.